Hi everybody, welcome to my presentation. We're going to do a little lecture and then I'm going to give you a treat at the end of it for sitting through it. So my lecture is on the deep sea, adaptations of the deep sea, sort of the environment, but specifically we're going to focus on the anglerfish and its reproductive methods that it's had to develop as a means of living in this very hostile environment. So let's get started. So some of the qualities of the deep sea. It is the largest and dimmest of the habitats on Earth. There's only two sets of light in the ocean. One is downwelling, which is sunlight, which is obviously incredibly limited in these deep oceanic environments. The second is bioluminescence, which is created by organisms living down there as an adaptation to deal with it. It is in a very extreme place. It's very cold, very high pressure, and almost a complete lack of light, especially as we get down to those aphotic zones near the bottom. It's an incredibly difficult to thrive area. It starts at 200 meters, but there's usually no sunlight seen beyond 1,000 meters, and that's where these anglerfish thrive. The availability of oxygen is also very low, and it requires very specialized adaptations in order to live in this area. So 70% of our globe is our oceans, and 95% of that 70% is classified as deep sea or under 200 meters. This means that many of these species are not going to be found anywhere else but these deep ocean environments. And really, when you think about it, that's fairly obvious because with these incredibly fine-tuned adaptations, there's not really anywhere else that they could live. So what are some adaptations of the creatures in the deep? Things like eye structure and visual specializations are very high end on these animals. There's things like asymmetrical and cylindrical shapes being used, tubular shapes, and these are specific to the deep sea. The feeding and mating is going to be a lot lower as well, as there's a lower availability of things like food, mates, and oxygen. Essentially, everything that's needed for life is going to be lower in this deep sea environment. Metabolism is going to be a lot slower as well in these organisms, and this is due to lower energy requirements. Respiration rates being lowered is also a direct result that a lot of organisms have adapted in order to thrive. Bioluminescence has evolved in many organisms in this area for many different reasons. It's used for things like communication, feeding, mating, and this acoustic behavior for communication as well is something that we're going to see in these communities as they've needed to develop very novel approaches to survival. So physiological and biochemical adaptations to deal with very extreme pressure are also vital in these animals. Things like sodium potassium pumps in the gills of deep sea fish are very fine-tuned and geared towards this high pressure, very cold, very barren environment. Protein and lipid biochemistry will also be geared towards the deep sea profile. And as I've mentioned, these adaptations are incredibly finely tuned and very niche and extremely specific to really allow these organisms to thrive. Supplying systems for ATP in the locomotion muscles of deep sea fish is a great example of that. And this has just really brought the physiological processes of these animals within the barriers of the nutritional and physical characteristics of this habitat. So specifically now we're focusing on anglerfish. So just kind of some general information about them. Anglerfish are bathypelagic. They inhabit those really dark, cold areas of the sea, and that can be up to 3,000 meters deep. White anglerfish have been found beyond that 1,000-meter mark. So it's very impressive to see how far that they've taken those adaptations. They do have a bioluminescent lure, obviously, as we can see in this image here. This is used for things like mate attraction and predation. They're sexually dimorphic, and in a minute we'll see how very different these two sexes are. The males actually can smell underwater pheromones emitted by the females, and they're the aggressor during sexual relations. So the males are a lot more abundant, and researchers believe this is due to the vast difference in growth rate. So what are some of the deep sea adaptations that are more specific to anglerfish? Bioluminescence is obviously a really big one. They have an extremely developed olfactory system, and this kind of rings reminiscent of the males being able to smell those waterborne pheromones. If you're going to be a deep sea organism, you've got to find a way to mitigate that dark and move away from a more visual-based system. They have very sharp dagger-like teeth, no ribs, a huge and retractable jaw structure, and food is actually captured by sort of weaponizing drift. Their body is very pliable, which plays into that no rib thing, and this means that they can eat things many times bigger than them. Prey is not common in the deep sea, so when you do come across something that you can eat, we really have to make it count, and that's what anglerfish are doing here. Their lure is called an elysium. It mimics live bait, and it actually comes from a modified dorsal fin spine. The tip of it is called an esca, which means bait in Latin. They actually glow due to symbiotic bacteria that is not from them, but the chemical reaction of this bacteria allows them to maintain that iridescence. So the general kind of aspects of anglerfish reproduction are that there's small parasitic males that are permanently attached to large and sluggish females. This is a process called sexual parasitism. The female lives very passively. The male, like I mentioned, is the aggressor. He bites the female using pincers, and this leads to a fusing of tissues. Males are very, very small, and the females are large and gelatinous, and this means that sometimes the female can actually fuse with many males at the same time. Both sexes are present during the reproductive process, obviously, and both of those presences usually results in the sexual maturation being attained. So this process is done to maximize reproduction in the vast deep ocean where mates are very hard to come across. So you need to kind of put those two together permanently to ensure that always there flow of sperm. When this fusion occurs, the male will lose their eyes, fins, and organs, but not their testes, and the female tissues will actually dissolve around his mouth. This just ensures that the female can retrieve sperm on demand, and this helps with reproduction and breeding. So even more specific to the anglerfish, if the female is not sexually mature, the males will always still attach and they will just wait it out. They do this by gripping with the pincers, and then that blood system will fuse, and that a direct result of that is a very specific and very novel process that leads to a shared circulatory system. The digestive and the sensory systems of the male also break down. So how is this possible? Because it seems like the female may reject the male due to her immune system. But immune systems in anglerfish have actually evolved so that the male is not rejected. This has been done by a loss of genes that encode vital components of immunity, and as such, both the male and female can tolerate the tissue antigens of their mate, or in the female mates. Get it, girl? So these new immune responses to battle pathogens have to be there somewhere. Scientists aren't entirely sure what they are yet, but we're seeing in them a loss of B and T lymphocytes. The skin-triggered immune responses are completely eradicated, and this is very curious because in mammalian systems this results in death, but we're not sure how these anglerfish are fighting pathogens. So the process of anatomical joining is very, very unique. It's called parabiosis, and they think a gene called the MHC gene may be involved, but they're not exactly sure how. So because this permanent joining isn't seen anywhere else, this is a very important area of research. So what's next in research is essentially trying to find how anglerfish are able to battle pathogens like diseases and viruses in the deep sea while not rejecting their mates. So we have made it to the end of my presentation. I'm going to let John play a song that I wrote for you guys that kind of sums up this information. I hope you like it, and thank you so much for listening.